And in your institute, it went back completely presential?
Not completely, but almost 100% in activity.
I'm one of the last presenter online. Went back completely presential?
Not completely, but almost 100% in activity. Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes. I'm going to speak in English in order to introduce the speaker for today's seminar, Dr. Oksana Bansegi. She is a researcher in the Instituto de Investigaciones Biomédicas. She works in the Department of Cellular Biology and Physiology. She is from Hungary, this European country. Dr. Bansegi studied biology in the Eötvös Loránd University, located in Budapest, the capital, the Hungarian capital. And eventually, her PhD was in ethology in the same university. He did postdoctoral studies in Mexico and in collaboration with Dr. Robin Hodgson. And she started an academic collaboration with Dr. Robin Hodgson that is still ongoing in these days. Her research is located mainly in the field of developmental psychology. She has studied mother-offspring interaction, as well as olfactory and visual discrimination in domestic animals. In PubMed, we can see that she has published more than 30 manuscripts in top journals in the field of biological behavior. Thank you very much, Dr. Oksana, and we are ready to listen to your seminar.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very honored. And I start to share the screen. See?
Very good.
Good. Okay, I just remove myself. Okay. So this talk probably will please more those who are interested in behavior and how we can, from the behavior of the animals, can have ideas about mechanisms and neurological mechanisms in the brain. So this talk we are going to be about the ontogeny of quantity discrimination and perception of visual illusion in the domestic cat. Visual signals are often ambiguous because two-dimensional retinal representation must be translated into the original three-dimensional form or scene, and that is interpreted by neurological and cognitive processes in the brain. However, visual assessment of a target object, for example, its color, shape, or size, can be distorted by the surrounding environment and leading to so-called visual illusions. In this talk, I will mostly focus on geometrical visual illusions, and we can broadly define them as visual illusions which the geometrical properties of an object, for example, its length, size, angle, are affected and systematically altered by the presence of other elements in the visual field. In the case of humans, the history of optical illusions can be traced back to the 5th century BC, to the ancient Greek. Epicramus a Greek philosopher, was the first who presented an explanation of the visual illusion phenomenon. He believed that even if our mind knows and understands everything clearly, the sensory organs deceive us and present an optical illusion. Protagoras, another Greek philosopher from the same period, had a different opinion on this. According to him, it was the environment that fools us and not our senses. And later, Aristotle, of course, tried to provide some satisfactory answer on this topic. And he agreed with Protagoras on the point that we can rely on our senses to obtain a correct picture of the reality, but also added that it was possible to fool the senses quite easily. However, in the case of animals, philosophers and researchers started to reflect much later whether they are sensitive to visual ambiguities or not. The first description of this subject appeared only in the early 20th century, when Thayer was the first who referred to the visual effects created by animal patterns as visual illusions. And now we call these actually descriptive coloration. And the first empirical study investigating non-human animals' perception of geometrical illusions dated back to the 1920s, and Révész, actually another Hungarian researcher, asked that whether animals are subject to the same optical illusions as humans are. This question was interesting in two ways. First, he wanted to know whether the optical phenomena, which cannot be explained without the collaboration of the central psychological factors, could also be discovered in animals. And second, is it possible to find a method which would lead to absolutely reliable results with the animals? So he chose this illusion, which called the Jastrow illusion. As you can see in this illusion, there is two objects which seemingly have different size, but actually they influence the perception of each other because they have the same size. So he used this illusion, and he trained a chicken to choose the smaller of any two figures. And when the bird was properly trained and reliably started to choose the smaller object from two options, he presented the illusion. And actually figured out that the chicken was susceptible to the illusion because almost always choose the visually smaller object. Still, Révész and his study was an exception because during these decades, animals were considered as machines and that they are perceiving exact replicas of the inputs they receive. Therefore, scientists were not really interested in perception and optical illusion in animals. Apart from a few exceptions, this view hasn't changed too much until the next century, where researchers started to realize that probably animals are more like humans in the way that their brain is altering visual inputs too. Moreover, some species actively manipulate their environment to create visual illusions. And in the last 2 decades, comparative studies of illusion perception between humans and non-human animals started to flourish, and these kinds of studies became increasingly recognized as a non-invasive tool to better understand visual perception and its underlying mechanisms and its evolutions. So let's see a couple examples where it seems that animals manipulate their environment to create visual illusions. Illusions of body size are particularly relevant in sexual selection. When choosing a mate, animals typically compare locally available mates and make choices based on features that may signal quality, such as size. Therefore, theory predicts that individuals should attempt to increase their perceived attractiveness by choosing to display in a social environment that contains lower quality males. Male fiddler crabs exactly do this. They display in a densely populated communities that allow the females to make comparative choices among the potential mates, and females prefer males with large claws. But the social environment can influence the perception of the individual's attractiveness, and females preferentially approach males that court alongside smaller clawed rivals, most likely because these males look relatively more attractive. And there are several possible explanations for this behavior, and one of them that the presence of the neighbors might create a visual illusion known as the Ebbinghaus illusion, where an object that is surrounded by smaller objects will appear relatively larger compared with the same object surrounded by larger objects. However, this is only an indirect evidence that the fiddler crabs actively manipulate their social environment. And actually, the first real evidence that males may utilize the Ebbinghaus illusion comes from the study on Guppies, where the females prefer to mate with colorful males with larger patches. And male Guppies actively choose to display alongside males with smaller color patches, meaning lower quality males, rather than males with larger patches, to make themselves appear relatively more attractive to the choosy females. And another example is coming from this spider, because during courtship display, these male peacock spiders raise their abdominal flaps and their third pair of legs to make the flaps and therefore themselves, the male, appear taller and wider than they are in reality. And this is very similar to the Delboeuf illusion. This illusion is formed by a single ring, as you can see, surrounding the target stimulus and causing that the target stimulus perceive larger or smaller depending on how close is the inducer ring. In humans, typically out of the two target objects, the one bordered more closely by the inducer ring is perceived as larger. So from the empirical studies done until today, we know that in general, most animals are susceptible to geometrical illusions, albeit with some important exception. And so far, approximately 40 behavioral studies on 15 species with 6 illusions found that that animals experiencing illusion susceptibility, the 73% of them, and they do it as the same direction as humans. 12% reported the lack of susceptibility, and 15% reported that the animals are susceptible to illusions, but in the opposite direction as the humans. So actually, the diversity of results is surprising, but so far unexplained. The way that the sensory information is captured and processed by the visual system can vary notably across species. Within vertebrates, even within mammals or birds, these differences originate from anatomical differences in the structure and position of the eyes and their underlying neural circuits, and both shaped by the evolutionary processes or from environmental pressure and ecological niche requirements. Even a new review arguing that the method what they use to test the animals can influence the results. So in the next part of this talk, let's see some experiments from our group where the subject was the domestic cat. And you can ask why we choose the cat. Because they have been the major subject in neurophysiological studies. Nearly all the neurophysiological data associated with the visual system have been coming from the cat for 3 good reasons. The visual system is very similar to humans. They have a good vision and easy to work with their visual cortex since it's easily accessible without damage to other parts of the brain. But it is still debated whether the neurophysiological data correlates with the behavioral data. And there is still a little information how cats see the world. And since the cats became one of the most common companion animals in the world, there is an increasing interest in their cognitive abilities too. So what else can be said in general about the cat's visual perception? Cats, like many mammals, also depend in large part of visual cues to navigate in their environment. They have a semi-arboreal lifestyle. They move and hunt in 3 dimensions, similarly to most primates, but they are carnivores, like dogs. Cats can be trained to differentiate between quantities, even with small differences like 2 and 3. And they perceive visual illusions like subjective contours, what you can see. Oops, let me turn on the laser pointer. Yes, you can see here, this is the Canija triangle illusion, or one of the motion illusion is the moving snake illusion. Okay. So to test the cat's perception with a size-related geometrical visual illusion, first we had to test their size or quantity discrimination abilities, and we had to prove that they can do it and see what are their limits. Oh, so cats can be trained to differentiate between quantities, but we are interested to see what their limits in a spontaneous way. Therefore, we designed a 2-way spontaneous food choice test with 2 experiments. Participants, adult cats from both sexes, and we tested indoor and outdoor living cats too. And in the first experiment, we asked whether the cats discriminate between different number of same size pieces of food. So for that, the easiest task for them was when they have to choose between 1 and 4 pieces of food. As you see in this, the ratio is very low between the 2 quantities. It's 0.25, and we started to manipulate this ratio and started to increase it with more harder task for them. And this was the last one when they had to compare 3 versus 4 items. And in the second experiment, we asked whether the cats discriminate between different sizes of single pieces of food. And this was the easiest task for them when they had to choose between a small and a 5 times bigger pieces of food. And also we started to reduce the large amount to make the task more difficult for them. I wrote some videos to show how the experiment looked like. Here is the owner holding the cat. The experimenter showed the cat the 2 options, and the cat was released and let it make its choice. This is the quantity differentiation task, and this is where they have to choose between the sizes. Okay, and we found that cats reliably choose the larger amount of food in both experiments in a spontaneous way, and it seems they follow the Weber's law. The Weber's law say that 2 magnitudes are more easily distinguished as the ratio between the smaller divided by the larger decreases. However, we found also seemingly contradictory results, as you can see here. The choice of the cats when they had to differentiate between the easiest task in the largest and choose the largest item here in the 1 versus 4 pieces of food, or the largest 1 versus the 5 times bigger, their choice dropped back to chance level. And here in the lower figure, you can see the reaction time, and you can see that actually their choice the latency to choose increased. So this suggests for us that there was a motivational issue in this test. And actually in the wild, feral cats usually do not hunt large prey, but focus mainly on small or juvenile animals. But why? Why cats prefer small prey? First, we can think that maybe it's the manageability of the food. Large prey can be too costly to be worth hunting. It's increase the risk of injury, hard to transport, energetically too costly to handle. So for a solitary carnivore like the cat, even a small injury that might impair their hunting abilities can be lethal. And the second explanation, that's a possible second explanation, which is not mutually exclusive with the first one, it's that the cats don't want to leave behind uneaten remains, which might attract conspecific competitors or predators. There are reports on feral cats and anecdotes from owners on their pets, and even our observation that cats like to cover leftover food. And we also know that the larger members of the Felidae family, such mountain lions, lynxes, pumas, are also known to hide their remains of their prey. Okay, so after this experiment, we asked whether they perceive a visual illusion, now that we know that they are able to differentiate between quantities. And for that, we choose one of the most common geometrical illusions, the double illusion, which I already showed to you. And this, the size of the target object is misperceived because it's immediate surround. And if you can see this illusion, maybe if you make a little bit more attractive the target object, maybe you will perceive it. So as you see, actually this illusion is commercially used and their senses are exploited by restaurants. So let me share two theoretical explanations behind this illusion. And one is the assimilation contrast theory, which says that if the target stimulus and its inducer ring are close together, they will merge and be perceived as one, whereas if the inducer ring circle is farther away, this creates a distinction between the two, and the target object appears to be smaller. And another theory is the counter-interaction theory, which is not necessarily a competing theory, which this proposes that the counters that are proximal to an object perceptually attract, whereas counters that are further away and exceed a certain distance perceptually repelled, and which this turn causes a change in the apparent size. So what do we know about other mammalian species' perception of the double illusion? We know, in general, non-human primates perceive this illusion in the same way as humans do. However, in two different experiments, they found that dogs do not perceive this illusion. So what about the cat and their illusion perception? Will they be similar to the primate species, possibly due to their similarities in lifestyle, or rather similar to the taxonomically more closely related domestic dog? So how can we test this illusion with the cat if we want to avoid excessive training? We follow the methods of previous studies on human primates and the dogs, at least one of them, to make our results comparable with them. And again, we created a two-way food choice task. There were two control conditions, this and this, where we put different amount of food on same size plates, large plate and small plates. And this was the large and small control condition. and we made the test condition here, where we place the same amount of food on different size plates. One of them is a large plate and the other one is a smaller plate. And we hypothesized that in the control conditions, and predicted that the cats will choose the larger amount of food in a spontaneous way. And in the test condition, if they choose the food on the smaller plate, it means they perceive the illusion. A small video about the test. One of the control conditions. The experimenter placed it on a sheet. So the background was not an influencer factor. Here comes the owner with the cat. Let the cat see and make the choice. And in the illusion trial, it was the same. We also randomized the position of the test every time and repeated several times with every individual. Okay. So, what did we found? That that the cats, yes, they choose the larger amount of food more reliably in the control conditions, in the large and the small control conditions too. And in the test condition, they chose above chance level the small plate with the food, which means that probably they perceive the double illusion. And next to this, we also found an interesting result, actually. The lack of correlation between individual performance in the control trials and the performance in the illusion trials, which mean that cats who were more reliably chose the larger amount of food in the control trials were not necessarily the same individuals who were choosing the small plate, so they perceive the illusions. So does this mean for us that the perception of the visual illusion and the actual size discrimination are processed the nervous system differently? And we couldn't find any other studies which confirm this hypothesis. Only the studies shows with humans that probably different illusions underlie different neural mechanisms and processed by the brain differently, even if they are very visually very similar. But how can we test this hypothesis that the actual size perception and the size-related illusion perception are processed by the nervous system differently? And the solution came from the human literature, where they found that children below 7 years of age are able to judge sizes very reliably, but they become susceptible to geometrical illusion only later. And this suggests that the illusion mediating circuits, which probably involve higher cortical areas, might not be fully developed at this younger age. And actually, this is supported by another research, which showed that there is a loss of gray matter, which sounds horrible, but actually it's normal. So there is a loss of gray matter in the right parietal and visual areas of the children around 6 years of age. And this may reflect only an anatomical maturation process or a reorganization in the neural system. So what we did is that we repeated our experiment, but using 7-week-old kittens, which were just before weaning And here you can see how we tested the kittens. We used exactly the same methods. The only difference is that we put them in a lower starter point, so the jumping was not hard for them. Okay, so what did we found? That the kittens seem to be as good as the adults in the actual size discrimination. In both control conditions, they choose the larger amount of food above chance level. But in the illusion trials, they didn't choose the smaller plate above chance, which suggests for us that they don't perceive the Darboux illusion, at least not in this control condition, not under these control conditions. So let's see again that our main findings, that the weanling kittens as adults can distinguish visually between the object of different sizes, and they spontaneously choose the larger amount of food. But in contrast to adults, the kittens did not choose the food on the small plate significantly above chance, which suggests that they don't perceive the Darboux illusion. And how can be explained these differences in the kittens' ability to distinguish different size stimuli and their apparent failure to perceive the illusion? One possibility is that this reflects the differential maturation of the brain with later development of higher cortical areas, which makes them to perceive the illusion. So there is a developmental heterochronicity between the size judgment and illusion perception. It is known that the primary visual cortex of the cats grows substantially during early postnatal development without an overall change of the shape, and it's reached adult proportion by the 12 weeks of age. And this suggests that the visual cortex of the kittens was still not fully developed at the age when we started testing them. They were only 7 weeks old. Another possibility that the different susceptibility to visual illusions between adult and young be due to the lack of the hypothesized assimilation effect during the early development. That is, that kittens and young children might tend to process visual cues locally, ignoring the surrounding information, and so judge the size of the object accurately, while adults might be a global processors and incorporate surrounding information, making that judgment, and when they making that judgment. And another possibility, which is not mutually exclusive, that the full development of the visual function depends on experience and interactions with the complex world beyond the rearing environment of the present study where the kittens were. The kittens' room were contained various forms of enrichment, such toys, boxes, but they didn't have the long distance vistas. And since this is the first developmental study on quantity judgment and illusion perception in a mammalian species, except humans, we don't really have the possibility to compare our results with others, So there is a need for more study like this. And how can we continue from here? And one possibility is to test the robustness and the generality of our present findings. For example, testing cats with other visually similar illusion, like the Ebbinghaus illusion, or another geometrical illusion, the Ponzo illusion. Or another possibility to try to disentangle the relative contribution of the maturational and experiential processes to the development of the visual system of the cat, and which is not easy, but maybe we can get some understanding that comparing the performance across development of purely indoor and purely outdoor cats. So these are possible next steps. And I reach my end of the talk. Thank you for your attention. And if you think that working with cats is easy and these experiments were just fun, let me show you a small video about the struggle that we had to collect our data. Actually, we had to exclude several individuals because lack of motivation, even after long time deprivation. And the kittens were another challenge to convince them to behave. And this was another interesting phenomenon. Some individuals were so lateralized in their behavior that even if we didn't put food on one side, they kept going to there. And now I really reached the end of the talk. So let me stop sharing the screen. And yes, I'm back.
Okay, thank you very much for your seminar. If you want to send your questions or comments, you can write or you can ask for the microphone to be open. Let me see. Dr. Fernando Peña asked, does the food used in these experiments have any odor? If so, could it be a confounding factor?
It's a very good question. Yes, the food had odor. Actually, we did a little examination before we started to work any of the individual. We tried to use their favorite food to make them motivated. And to control the problem about the food, that we did another small experiment where we tested cats where they were not able to see the food. We made a two-choice food task, but they were not able to see the food, only to smell it. And we used different amount of foods. And we found that it didn't affect their choice at all. So they are more relied on their visual cues than olfactory cues when they make a choice.
Okay, Dr. Manuel Aguilar says, congratulations for your excellent seminar, Dr. Bansegui.
Thank you.
Could you please give more details about the effect of these illusions on outdoor living cats?
Yes, actually, we had another experiment because we were very interested that is there any effect of indoor-outdoor cats and how might the size or the amount influence their judgment. And in this experiment, we used live prey mice and rats. We in the two experiments in one we used one mouse versus 3 mice. They had to choose, and in the other experiment we used a mouse compared to a big rat. Of course, the cats were not able to touch the animals, but they were able to smell it. So the target animals were not harmed during this experiment, and we found that there is a difference between indoor and outdoor cats, and actually the outdoor cats were more cautious in their choice, if we can say this, because they in the quantity experiment they choose the 1 mouse versus the 3 mouse. And in the size difference experiment, they always choose, more often they choose to approach the mouse and not the rat.
Dr. Manuel Aguilar says, thank you very much. And there is another question from Dr. Carmen Aceves. Excellent conference. Is it known at what age does size perception develop in humans?
As I recall, there are experiments with small babies, like 4 months or 6 months, and they are already able to make differences between sizes.
I see. Let me see. If someone wants to use a microphone, not yet. Let me see the chat. No questions. Let's wait for some seconds, minutes.
Of course.
What happens if you compare cats with dogs?
In which sense do you mean?
In this visual discrimination test?
What we know that the dogs are also very good in size discrimination. The same, they show the same level as the cats, but for example, they don't perceive the Delboff illusion. They tried it in 2 different experiments in a spontaneous test like we did, and there was a excessive training test. They also found that they don't perceive this illusion, but they also found that they, for example, perceive other type of illusions like the Ebbinghaus illusion, which is very similar. So it's also very interesting things. What's going on in the dog's brain.
I see. Tonatiuh Munguia, thanks a lot. It was very interesting. Would cats perceive this size difference illusion the same if the targets were in movement?
I'm sorry, maybe I don't catch exactly the question.
Would cats perceive this size difference illusion the same if the targets were in movement?
I see. Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I guess to perceive this illusion, it has to be static. I think if we introduce movement, it can influence a lot the perception of the size. I would think.
I see. Another question. If the hippocampus is playing a role in this discrimination, do you know if it's CA1 or CA2 regions of hippocampus?
No, sorry, I don't know these details. And I'm not even sure that the hippocampus is involved in illusion perception.
I see. Let me check. Well, I think we don't have more questions. Nobody is asking to use a microphone. Then we thank you, your excellent seminar.
Oh, I thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored
and maybe
to present to this institute.
In the future, you can come to Querétaro.
I hope so.
And we can have a second seminar, but in person.
I hope so. I can do that.
Thank you very much, Oksana.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Muchas gracias a todos. Hasta luego. Goodbye. Thank you.